I think we're live.
I think we did it. I think we're live. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Ednesha and I are thrilled to have panelists, have all of our attendees here. This is our 50th episode of BeREAL, the podcast that we started the week we went shelter in place. So we were on a roll to start it, and we just kept on doing it because we just kept on doing it. So tonight we have a very special conversation, one that is very dear to Ednesha and I and to the panelists in the room. And we are going to be talking about anti-racism from the business perspective and also from in the room as clinicians. And I do want to make a note that, and Ednesha knows this, when we were advertising for this event, it was right around the election. We were putting things out, and first when we put it out as an ad, it was rejected because it said anti-racism in the ad because of whatever Facebook was, and then we redid it as culture, race, and identity, and that bounced back. And then we finally came up with language around cultural competency that was watered down enough for Facebook and Instagram to be able to tolerate. So this was how we knew we were in the right place and having the conversation at the right time, because it is very important. So Ednesha.
I am excited that this is our 50th episode. I can't believe it. To start this in a pandemic was super hard. Just kind of dealing with having to be home all day, every day, not knowing what was next. But I knew every Friday afternoon we would be doing this. And it's so interesting how Diana and I got so much closer because we were spending all of this extra time together. And it's kind of been amazing. So I just am so grateful that all of you guys are here to have this really important conversation. So thank you so much. Diana, do you want to, I guess we should just let everyone go around and introduce themselves. Can we start that way?
Yeah, where are you going to start?
So why don't we start with Dr. Natalie?
Sure. Do you want me to just say my name or a little bit more about myself?
A little bit. Let's tell everybody who you are, a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So
I've been having an intimate relationship with you all because you've been in my ear, so everybody else should know.
Oh, the beauty of webinars and podcasts. So I'm Dr. Natalie Edmond. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and yoga teacher. I'm located in central New Jersey, in Mercer County, and I own a group practice in Ewing, New Jersey called Mindful and Multicultural Counseling. And I'm also an anti-racism consultant. I facilitate a lot of anti-racism workshops and just workshops around racial trauma and building cultural competence and just how do we have more intimate relationships and be able to talk about race and other identities. So I'm excited to be here with all of you to dive deeper into this much needed topic.
Veronica.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought you're just going to call on us or going order. Okay. Hi, Veronica. I'm licensed clinical social worker. It's hard. I'm hearing my voice back, so it's throwing off my thoughts, but I'll try to work with that. Co-founder and director of BABA Therapy Group, and we offer clinical services, individual, group, family, psychotherapy, with all Midtown Manhattan and the Bronx. And we also are approved providers of continuing education. So we have continuing education program that's been in operation for I think at least 3 years now, and it's something that's near and dear to my heart, the labor of love, because I really believe firmly in the power of productivity, of professional growth, and self-exploration and reflecting as professionals, and how that can deepen our practice with clients. And I don't know what else did I say. I think that's about it.
I think that's a lot. I love it. Carrie?
Sure. So I'm Carrie Moore. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and also a therapist. And I run a group practice called A Good Place Therapy and Consulting. We're located downtown Manhattan, and we work mostly with adults and couples, although we're expanding and have expanded recently into serving more kids, teens, and also working with families. And we've been, immersed in our own anti-racism work as a practice, and really trying to do everything that we can to unlearn the racism and really understand our place with white supremacy. And I'm really excited to be here in conversation with you all to do that.
And Lyrica?
Hi, everyone. My name is Lyrica Fize-May. I am a licensed clinical social worker and registered play therapist. I work with Veronica at BAVA Therapy Group, and I've been a CEU trainer there for, I think, the last 3 years. And we have an anti-racist or a racial literacy group that we're doing monthly. And I also work most days of the week at the New York City Department of Education as a director of equity transformation and culturally responsive environments. It's like the longest title ever. And yeah.
That is a very impressive title, though. I like it. I didn't even know that they had, well, it's also good to know because I didn't actually know that they had that title at the DOE. So that's wonderful news. Okay, so thank you so much, ladies. And again, I'm super excited to have you all. We're going to start the conversation with Dr. Natalie, because as I mentioned, she's been intimately in my ears. So I recently listened to a training that she gives to group practice owners and businesses and all about, it was on a group practice podcast, which is why I'm identifying it that way, about anti-racism. And I was really struck when you got, and you can start anywhere in the conversation. My personal takeaway was I really like the way that you broke down the 4 different categories of businesses. It was very, I think when we got, I understood the first 2, and when we got to diversity and anti-racism, I was like, oh, okay, there's some big differences there. So wherever you want to start about your work and what you do, but please.
Sure. So I'd say my anti-racism work is, I do some for group practices who want to, either they're all white practices or predominantly white practices who want to explore their whiteness and want to be more anti-racist in the ways that they communicate with each other and the community and clients. And then I work with group practice owners around business coaching and just like, how do you lead from this anti-racist lens? And then I do like community workshops, just like people who just want to explore this kind of stuff in a safe space. So one of the things I really like is looking at what's the culture of an organization. So whether you're a small business or a big business, a therapy practice or some other kind of business, is looking at that there are 4 main types of businesses. So when we look at it from a racial lens. So on the one end of the continuum would be kind of the traditional all-white club, right? And so if we look like in history towards like the colonizer, we think of all-white club as being, all white, cis, male, probably heterosexual, upper class, educated. And so a lot of that is very much a top-down hierarchy. And so the power is held in that all-white club. And even if we see over time as, female presenting individuals have gained more rights, so it might be an all-female club, but it might still be predominantly white. And when we look at those kind of businesses, they tend to be in pretty white neighborhoods, probably more suburban. There's kind of a particular way that the business is decorated that really centers whiteness. And it's kind of just the standard that, we were used to for a really long time. Then the next category would be kind of token or affirmative action. So it's where you start to, there starts to be more assimilation, and you start to see more Black, Indigenous, or people of color who are also working in these roles, but they tend to not have a lot of power. And the power is really at the top and still pretty hierarchical. So even though you have more BIPOC individuals in the organization, the culture really doesn't change. It's really about how do you assimilate into a predominantly white space. and race is not really talked about. And there's a lot of desire for like conformity. And then the last two categories can be kind of confusing. So the third category would be a multicultural business, multicultural organization. So there's more BIPOC individuals in that business. There's some experimentation with like, maybe we can not be so top down, so hierarchical. You might even start to see more BIPOC people in leadership roles. The office decor might better represent what's happening in the community. Even if you look at like what is the funding, or is it self-pay or insurance-based? Some of that stuff starts to change, and there's more of a sense like we should start talking about racism, but it's still pretty conflict avoidant in those organizations. And then at the other end would be the fourth category would be anti-racist. And so that is really an active practice of trying to dismantle white supremacy, to work against racist policies and ideas, this idea that like, let's start to look at neurodiversity and maybe employees work differently and have different styles, and how do we accommodate that? How does where we live or where our business lives reflect the community we actually want to serve? Does our staff match the community we're trying to serve? Do we allow for a sliding scale or insurance or some way that a wide variety of people can access the services we offer? And there's active like discussion around race and oppression and other ways in which identities can be marginalized. Assimilation is not the standard. It's more about inclusion, and that we have to adapt everything we do in order to fit that. So that would be like the example of the 4 different organizations. And for me, it's helpful to think about that, because even when I look at my own businesses, like it's an active practice to be anti-racist, even though that when I founded it, that's what I wanted it to be. But we're so socialized into kind of white supremacy culture that it's hard to, it takes much longer, right? And white supremacy is about perfection and urgency. And so how do we challenge some of those systems?
Thank you, because, and I know as a business owner, when I was hearing the nuances between multicultural and diversity and anti-racist, and you're right, like in my mind, it was always an anti-racist establishment, but where are we being influenced? It really, really, really made me think, like, where are we being influenced in the organization? Like, what other things do we need to bring in to make sure that we are having more active conversations, and more awareness on my part as the owner of the business, and just like making sure that I am actively in the conversation all the time. It's a lot. It was very eye-opening in the way that you put it. I liked it a lot. But I'm not the only group practice owner here. So how are you guys, Carrie or Veronica? How are you guys doing with that nuance in there?
You know, I don't know. I'm having a hard time comparing myself to back. So I don't want to, I think the timing of the video is off.
Oh, I can hear you now.
Okay. I found it very illuminating to hear it broken down with those categories. As you were speaking, I was thinking about the different work environments that I had worked in prior to being in the practice that we're in now. And I had former lives in finance and public relations in a male-dominated, female-dominated environment, and now into social work and clinics I work in the practice that we're in now. You know, it's interesting. I would think, and Erica, you've helped me with this, we would fall more towards being more, I guess, multicultural in our practice in terms of our therapists and stuff. And I feel like a lot of how we went about growing our practice and building our team was more based on qualities of the person oftentimes we would interview our therapists. I never saw pictures or it was like, I want to talk to this person, I want to see the skills, I want to get a sense of who you are through your voice. And it's just, we went about the quality of the person without being intentionally anti-racist or intentionally multicultural. And sort of that's where we landed in a way. I don't know if I can sense for that, but hearing about the nuances of the different categories just helped me reflect on where we are and how we do and what we reflect without intentionally trying to do so. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yep. I want to echo that too, because like I look at, that was a really helpful frame, Natalie, and I was looking at our process as where we're at, and I was feeling like a little ouch when you talked about the all white club, because I felt like there was a period of time when I was building the practice that my practice reflected that, and then being a practice in a diverse city like New York and downtown Manhattan, that really is not acceptable. And I found it also to be like a reflection of a lot of what I saw in my career in different nonprofit settings where in nonprofit leadership, I was able to, easily hire people of color into many different positions and management positions, as long as they weren't the clinical social work positions. And then I had certain positions in community organizations that were, Medicaid funded in particular, that required LCSW or clinician. And then I would only be getting resumes from white social workers. And then, before you know it, I had, a social work department that was all white in a very diverse, large organization with multiple programs where it was very diverse and where there were many people of color across all positions. And so I've struggled with seeing how white the institution of social work is and the ironies that are embedded in that, because, we're really, social work is supposed to be about, person in the environment and representation. And there are real systematic barriers to people of color entering the field and to completing internships and jumping through, all the hoops that are required. And so I looked at that as a systemic problem, and I have seen that throughout my career. But I think in my practice, I also used it as a crutch and as an excuse, and would kind of find myself just replicating the same patterns, not doing as much work as I should have earlier on to really not hire another person until I could hire a person of color. And, I felt like we paid the price of that when George Floyd was killed, and there was a, galvanizing across the board for what we needed to do as a practice, as individuals, as a profession, as, clinical leaders in the community, and that we're supposed to be responsible for healing. And it was painful. So, we went from probably being somewhere in between maybe two, I would give myself maybe the second tier, back in May to where we're at now, which is more actively striving towards the anti-racism. So I think, for me, I kept on like this mantra about there's no growth without discomfort. That was very real for me. But it still is like very real in the process. Like it is a, like a raw space, but a necessary kind of space to be in.
I agree with you that it just, it's really hard, right? I think if we look at like just the social work or counselor or psychology profession, there's a small percentage that are BIPOC identifying individuals who even get degrees and get licensed. So it's a very small pool that you're trying to recruit from. And so I think for myself, I kind of the standard that I've tried to hold for myself is, can I have 30% of my staff be BIPOC identifying? And what are some of the barriers to that? Like sometimes that means that I mentor people earlier in the field who maybe don't have as many of the bells and whistles or enough training, like in terms of like advanced training. And so I just like will spend the time mentoring them and helping them grow within the organization. But also thinking about my practice treats a high number of BIPOC individuals. Is that how do I train my white clinicians to be able to hold the space for BIPOC clients? Because some BIPOC clients only want to work with people who look like them, but others just want culturally competent therapists who have done their own inner work and are able to hold the space for them to bring their full selves into the therapy room. So finding that balance of both.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece on that we encountered in our practice is when one of our BIPOC therapists had a client who's white and expressed sort of discomfort, or there's that come up.
Yeah.
You know, right?
Yeah, I think there's some things to consider, right? Like social work started out helping poor white people. It has never really been designed to help BIPOC people. And so and Natalie, you said this earlier, that like white dominant culture is the kind of the air that we breathe. Like we're breathing that in constantly. And so when we look at organizations that are all white, we don't necessarily have a negative reaction to that. And we can be in New York City, which is like the most diverse city, I don't know, maybe in the world, but definitely in the country. And it's also very, very segregated, right, at the same time. And one thing I have been talking to an organization in Chicago that I think does this work better than a lot of organizations in New York is that some BIPOC folks are even terminating with white clients who have caused harm to them. So the clinician is a BIPOC, identifying the client causes harm, and they are even terminating those clients. And like sometimes I tell somebody that, and that sounds outrageous, but the truth is that like to be a BIPOC clinician and be putting all your work into someone and then hear their true views on your actual value of your life can be extremely painful, and you should almost be charged extra for something like that. And so there's just so much work to do in that kind of work, and we have a long way to go to keep unlearning everything we've learned.
I love that policy in Chicago. They should be discharged or charged more, for sure. Most certainly as an experience of it's a therapeutic experience too for them, for that person. Mm-hmm. I love that. And you do, and also Dr. Natalie, you bring up a really good point, and this is something that Ednesha and I were talking about earlier, is the white clinician, is that if we have 30% of the population in our field are BIPOC identified, and then really training the white clinicians on how to be as open and love, all the things. I was going to say loving because it's the first word I could think of, but like how we bring that into the room, and how we also then have the patient or client really trust that therapist. Because I do know that now, like we have a very similar, I mean, Ednesha is probably the busiest therapist I know right now. So, but she can't see everybody. So how are we gonna? And if we have a white clinician, they don't want to go. So where that education is for the therapist more so than the client, and then how do we make that initial introduction in the room so that the client feels safe is really that's yes, ma'am.
I was just thinking about when we get our training in social work school and other spaces that we get training, there's not a lot of training around racial-based trauma, right? So as clinicians, we know how to come in a room and we know how to talk to someone about sexual abuse, addiction, childhood trauma, but we don't talk about racial trauma, right? And I feel like as a BIPOC clinician, I had to do a lot of work with myself around that and what that meant for me. And how do I just kind of recognize that in someone and kind of sit with it and validate the feeling instead of try and fix it too, right? Because sometimes there's that fix it thing in us. And I just had to kind of sit with it. But we've never been trained. white clinicians, BIPOC clinicians, we haven't been trained around racial trauma in that way. It's like, it's a bad word. It's like a word you shouldn't bring in the room. And I remember after George Floyd, at Be.WELL, we actually had a meeting, and I was very transparent and I was very vulnerable. And I went on there and I was crying and I was in tears and I was just like, I'm in pain, right? And so for all the other clinicians, if you have any BIPOC clients, they are in pain too. And you have to talk about it. You can't act as if it's not happening, because, you know, getting on Zooms when you had just been crying somewhere in a closet and then you have to kind of present yourself as if everything is okay, it's painful. And so I was urging white clinicians, you know, at the practice, talk about it, bring it into the room. Because what, as another BIPOC person, and I'm in therapy as well, I'm thinking, if you don't talk about it, then you don't see me, because you know it's affecting me. It's all over the news. How can it not be affecting me? But I do believe that it's just not within our training. And that's where the misstep happens from the beginning when we're trained as clinicians. Why are we not talking about racial trauma in the way that we're talking about other traumas?
And why aren't we also talking about our own racial identity?
Yes.
You know, I found this to be eye-opening when I was studying at Ackerman last year, because it's a real practice to really start with your social locators and to do that with clients, you know, present in the room. And it's like an acknowledgement of this is what informs who I am with you in the room, because I'm not going to pretend that I'm a blank slate, you know, or I'm just like a sponge absorbing what you have to tell me. Like everything about who we are informs our interventions, informs our view. And I find I was shocked at how difficult some parts of my identity that were hard to explore. And then now I'm really striving to do this with our team and some of our active anti-racism work. It starts with, you know, who are you? How do you identify? What is your racial identity, you know, as a clinician? And it's a really good starting place too with white clients around racism and doing all the work to explore the ways that we're all impacted by white supremacy and patriarchy. Like, how do we kind of fit into this, the way that this is just kind of baked into our lives and we're all living under these oppressive structures.
And we have to constantly, I think, Carrie, what you said is so important. We have to constantly be acknowledging it. Like, I have to always, when I'm working with Black individuals, darker skin than me, I always have to acknowledge, like, I'm light skinned. I don't know what it feels like to feel unsafe on the street at any given moment. Like, I'm Black, but I'm light skinned, and there's a difference. And so as I'm validating their feelings, I have to bring it up again, even if I've already brought it up in every other session, because we're not used to that. We aren't trained in that. We think it's weird. We think we're being awkward or making a big deal, but we're actually giving permission in a situation where we're holding the power as the therapist, as the person who's billing insurance, as the person who's doing a diagnosis. We're hold the power, and we have to acknowledge where we stand and what we see when we're working with people. The other question that I really like to ask is, like, how much did race play a part in this? You know, if a client is dealing with something with a supervisor, you know, just asking what was the race of the supervisor? How much does race play a part in it? And they might say nothing. You know, I don't think race is an issue here, but just acknowledging it on my part is extremely important, that I see you, right? And I see your skin color, and that it's important to me, and that I value you.
Mm-hmm. It seems like the first challenge is challenging colorblindness, right? Which is, I think, that culture of politeness and how people haven't built the muscle to talk about race, right? So what I notice a lot in the various trainings I run is like the paralysis that a lot of white embodying, white presenting individuals have, is they understand that they need to do something, but they don't have the vocabulary, they haven't done enough of the work. And it's really uncomfortable to hold that space. I taught this graduate course in the fall called Multiculturalism and Feminism, and it was for first year doctoral counseling students. And they each had master's degrees, and they had taken a multicultural class in their master's program, but it was much more focused on cultural competence and not so much on cultural humility, and definitely not anti-racism. And so you could see how painful it was for the white presenting students. Like, it was so painful for them to talk about all of these different identities and to really explore their whiteness. They grew tremendously by the end of the semester, but you could see them wrestling with it. You could see the fragility. You could see the defensiveness. I even had a student in the class say, like halfway through the semester, that she was in her own therapy and she was talking to her white therapist, and the therapist who was a seasoned therapist said, yeah, I don't take any of the multicultural continuing education classes. I just don't treat BIPOC people. And so my student was like, I want to be like that too. I just want to avoid all of this because I feel so uncomfortable. And she was able to stay with it. And by the end of the semester, she did this amazing immersion project on African-American population, and she had grown so tremendously. So I think we're doing a disservice to so many counselors out there and therapists out there of not having them really sit in this discomfort in a space where that allows you to be messy and to have racist ideas. And how could you not have racist ideas having lived in this country for any amount of time? The point is not to not have racist ideas, but to become aware of it and then start to dismantle and challenge that and then become anti-racist.
The term cultural humility, I'm going to put it everywhere, because I think that for me, I've been thinking about the one cultural competency class that you get in social work school, because there's one in your second semester or your first semester. There's just the one. And and when I think back on it, there was no humility then. It was a paper you wrote, you could identify, like when you were doing your biopsychosocial or whatever the case may be, and like that was it. You didn't have to identify your whiteness in the room. And I went to NYU. The room that I was in was all white with the exception of the professor, and there wasn't that space. And the education itself does need to change. I think when we are let out into the world to train people, to sit with people and sit with people's feelings and discomfort and your own feelings and discomfort, I think that is where we should really start. And I know all of my postgraduate training is in psychoanalysis, so that cultural competency class was white, but that psychoanalysis is just, they're like still trying to figure it out over there. I'm watching them sort of panic because the whole training is not to talk about it, not to identify that you are even in the room. And I'm like, oh, but that doesn't make it, you have to talk about it. You do, in so many different ways.
It's almost like it's not integrated. It's like looked at as like this other separate thing that you do. You take cultural competency class, like you earn that CEU. But I think a lot of clinicians, like your student, that's such a wonderful example of how she talked about bringing that to her therapist, and her therapist saying, I don't see that as relevant, for my practice. But I think for me, early on, a big battle of, the journey is how do we really ensure that everybody sees and understands how integrative this is to our practice as clinicians, that it's everything about what we do and that it's not separate, because it's who we are. And, who are we as therapists or clinicians if we're not talking about the core of who we are? So it just, I was so lucky to find this wonderful clinician, Dr. Melba Sullivan, who's been, I don't know if anyone knows her, has worked with her, but she's been guiding us on the journey and really kind of helping us with that. And, my hopes and getting feedback from the team is that we're integrating it, completely and kind of doing that work.
So since we're talking about courses, Erica, can you kind of give us an overview of the racial literacy courses that you've created for individual therapists? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we have different, they're not coming to my mind right now. Why is that? Okay, well, there's one on ancestral trauma, resilience, and wisdom. Like one thing that we always talk about in terms of BIPOC people is, here's our history, and we have trauma, and we have generational trauma, and we need to understand that. Actually, we don't always talk about that, but sometimes we talk about that, and then we never really talk about the resilience that exists from people who have survived genocides and slavery. And there's a lot of ways that people did and do work through what has been left out of that. So that is one. We have one called Impact versus Intent, Decolonizing Therapy, which we just sort of reworked. And that one is really about, what are the rules that are a part of therapy that we just follow? Like they've been these ancient rules, like sessions are 45 minutes or 50 minutes, right? Like who decided that? Like, does that work for all groups? There's a big movement now to change the way that therapy is really focused on the individual, because if we look at white dominant culture, individualism is a huge part of white dominant culture, and maybe we need to do more either groups or bring in more people into the therapy, mix it up, not always do individual therapy. So just really looking at the different rules that we participate in therapy, or even around self-disclosure. If you're a white clinician and you have a BIPOC client, like how is not just self-disclosing actually harmful, perhaps, right? And in what ways is that just maintaining an imbalance of power? We have another, or Veronica, which ones am I missing?
Well,
like
you did.
but they're not coming to my mind.
The bias.
Oh yeah, so the implicit bias, that's where we start. Implicit bias gets a bad rap in terms of not being able to necessarily change people's minds. But if you pair it with, or if you use that as a foundation, that can get people to have the same common language, understanding, that as we all have brains, that we have bias. And so I think that one's actually really important also for clinicians, because as social workers or mental health practitioners, we think we kind of wear this badge of armor as being like, we have empathy. Like, my sister will always say, like, you're a terrible therapist. Like, how can you call me that name, right? I'm not a therapist in every moment. And so while like with my clients, I might do a great job, like in the real world, I can still cause a lot of harm, right? And so we have to just understand these concepts, and it provides a really good foundation for that. And then we did one, like, how did we get here? So really going through the history of the United States and looking at the genocide, the impacts of slavery, and Jim Crow, and like all the, Black people in this country have been enslaved longer than they've been free. And so we really need to look at the history that we didn't learn in school, because nobody really learned great history unless you got history from outside of your regular education in school. And so we need to relearn and do better as we move forward. So those are some of our workshops.
Yeah, and
I'm not sure where to start on the workshops. No,
It's a lot.
I'm back at like the decolonizing and the 45-minute session and bringing more people into the room, and suddenly my head went like, oh my goodness, like that, like, right, like, and I probably wouldn't have thought about that, because I am like I'm very trained in that. Like, I stand up at 45 minutes and I'm like, thank you. And my patients lie down. I mean, like, I do that. So it is very interesting to, and like, I got a little nervous and that I was like, oh, okay. But like, it's so also relieving to hear, right? Like that there can be a different way, and that there are different ways, and that there are different ways to treat people, and that that you are out there telling, like, really examining it, and that there is that opportunity to be different, and let more feelings out and be bigger containers. And yes, and also that we're not therapists 24 hours a day. Yeah.
we're not therapists 24 hours a day. But what's been so, I think, powerful is that we've had such a wide attendance and participation in these classes, which, while there has been such a hesitancy to talk about, like, right, your point, Ednesha said earlier about racial trauma, how that's not part of our training. And I remember a cultural competency class or multicultural competency class at NYU. And it was more just, not like a graph of all the different cultures and what you can learn about different people. But yeah, there was not the experiential piece that we need, which is what have I been through in my history growing up, in the worlds that I lived in, that I was born to, and what am I carrying into the room, whether I know it or not. And it's that piece of, you know, what I think I might know and what I might not know. And it's that part that we get afraid of, and we content to be hesitant, we don't want to insult, we don't want to be injured, we might not know. And to your point, Dr. Natalie, about learning the language and learning the words and learning how to attend to these issues that are real and valid and important and necessary, especially if we're in the position trying to help people sit with the discomfort. We do have to sit with our discomfort. And so through the racial literacy series that Lyrica has been teaching, the feedback has consistently been, this is amazing, there's so much, my head is spinning, what do I do with it? And so that's why, you know, Lyrica actually said, I think we need to switch up the next class and make it more, you know, how do we get into the room of the work experience, right? And part of why there is such a hunger, you know, and I think there's a growing hunger for doing this work as clinicians, which hopefully then we do more of it and we can spread it out wider and share the wealth of the work, so to speak, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting little side notes over here on how people can have access to your courses, ladies. So I just wanted you all to know that, like, when we put this out again, because it will show up as a podcast, and we will make sure that all of the information and how to connect to all of this wonderful information is in the show notes, and it will also go out in an email to everybody who registered for the class. I'm like, okay, we're signing you all up. I can't. It's amazing. I mean, I'm taking so many notes over here that I'm like, I'm not 100% sure where to go next.
I think I know where I would like to go really quickly.
Please.
Because the term anti-racist, it feels like it's a very new term to me personally. I'm not sure to everyone else on the panel. But my thought is that with this push for anti-racism in the therapeutic community, like, will it last? Or will it be something that will, like, kind of die down when it's no longer popular, right? Like, so when everyone is finished kind of taking their trainings, are we kind of just going to let it go to the wayside? Do you guys think that this is something that will actually last, even when it's not popular to talk about anymore?
I think a shift is happening. I think you can't undo the shift that's happening, right? But I also think we're in a window of time where we have to try to do as much as we can to build the roots and the foundation. I mean, I was doing anti-racism trainings before George Floyd's murder, but I do so many more since his murder, right? And so I think that the way I think about it, the more people are examining their own racial identity and their relationship to white supremacy and the harm they've done and what they've internalized, the more that lasts, right? And there will be people who are more performative, who like, you know, get through their guilt or their shame and decide to, like, opt out. But I think that there will be some, like, significant things that change. Like, I think the ways in which, like, I think we can't unsee what we saw in 2020. And I think we'll go from that momentum. And I think, like, there are moments of time, like, kind of like with the civil rights movement, right? Like, there was a large push and then we went back into, like, colorblindness. But, like, you can't challenge the fact that there was significant change that happened in the 60s. And so I feel like we're in this other time of reckoning.
Yeah, I was thinking of something similar, Dr. Natalie. Like, this is a movement, but there's been many more movements before this. And so while, you know, I think the pandemic allowed sort of a microscope on George Floyd's murder, he was not the first one to be murdered. And, you know, I think that there's a long way to go. Like, white supremacy is in every single institution, and things honestly need to be dismantled, taken apart. There's a long way to go to do that. Like, it takes a lot of work, and it's awful. I always say to people, like, equity work kind of sucks. Like, you have to feel really uncomfortable. You have to get called in and called out, and it sucks. Like, it's not an enjoyable thing. And we know this as like doing workshops. You have to, it's a different kind of like pulling yourself to the computer. It's a different experience than just having a meeting or having a session. Like, anti-racist work is, you know, we're always learning together in it. You can't really be an expert. And so, because there's always more to learn, and it's just kind of, it can be awful, right? And so I think while we all want to do it and like we want to stay in it, it's very important to acknowledge and validate, like, this is not that fun to talk about how, you know, I'm being treated, or how, you know, and be maybe sometimes, I don't know what the word is, devalidated, like unvalidated about my experience, and to maybe argue or like wrestle over a topic that nobody wants to talk about, you know? And so I think we have a long way to go. And I don't know if it might fizzle out in some places, but some people are going to keep doing the work, and then something else will happen, and we'll get another movement again.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's so uncomfortable and so needed. And I think I was on at the very beginning of the pandemic, and I think it was like 3 days after George Floyd was killed, I was on outside of the therapeutic space. I was on a different call, and there was a woman on the call, and she was like, I've never seen anything. She was just like, the portal is open. And it's like, the portal is open and we have to keep doing it. And it was just such a great image of like, we're going to keep doing the work, and we're going to do it, and we're going to get messy and be uncomfortable and keep going through the portal and keep working. And Carrie, I think I cut you off. Were you going to say something?
We started talking at the same time. Yeah, for us in our work with Dr. Sullivan, it's been a lot about kind of building our capacity and using this frame of a window of tolerance. And I think it's just necessary to be able to realize that we do have the capacity more than we think to be in the messiness and to do the work, and also to kind of handle, you know, the triggers that come up, because not everybody is in the place where they can do the work. And it's not convenient, especially for people who hold positions of power and for whom like white supremacy really serves. And I'm not saying that without looking at myself, but for me, it'll come up, like, you know, politically, like when Mike Pence was on the debate stage. I don't know if any of you tuned into the vice president debates, but he actually said, like, quote unquote, there's no such thing as institutional racism. And for me, I feel like it just is like rage. And then how do you channel that rage? Because the way that I learned to do that was, this is a really functional survival skill that he has to maintain this powerful position, and the people he needs to speak to in the audience to hear that. And it's functional in that way. And not everybody's going to see it. And it just means that, you know, we have to work harder, and we have to, you know, channel the energy that kind of comes from that, and then making sure that we see it clearly, and that we don't see ourselves as exempt from it. We just say, oh, I can see why he does that, because it's so hard, because he holds this much power. And it's really inconvenient to look at the ways that history has built racist institutions to benefit you as a white man, you know, or us as white people. You know, so for me, it's been always kind of going back to myself, and she's doing a lot of somatic work, you know, really like just working in our bodies, feeling where it comes up, like knowing where that is, like being able to say, I can drop into this, I can continue the work, and so I can keep doing it, and it can be sustainable.
Yeah. I think one thing I continue to struggle with around this is recognizing the piece, that fear of difference, the underlying fear of difference, and the clinging that happens to sameness or whiteness, likeness. And like, it's great to do the work when there's people who want to do the work, right?
Yeah.
And who are interested in, willing, ready, wanting to see the discomfort to grow. And there's scares me is how many people that we are learning to coexist with, and how we need to coexist with, who are not interested in doing the work. And that's what scares me as a human being in this world. And that's what I keep asking and thinking, how do we do this? How do we reach people who don't want to be reached, aren't interested in reach? Because that force is strong, and that's going to be there. And that's based on a lot of, primal fear, primal sense of power. There's a lot. I know that's like a whole other conversation, but that's what I kind of wrestle with. I'm like, okay, it's great that there are more people who want to do this work and look and question and self-reflect, but there's a whole host of people who don't want to, and that's what, as a human being, just living in this world and where that's going. So I'm taking it somewhere else. That's what I think.
It makes me think about, two things. One is thinking about Resmaa Menakem's work and my grandmother's hands and just this white body supremacy, like how that lives in our bodies and our tissues. That's the intergenerational trauma that, white people have had for a long time, in addition to BIPOC individuals. But it also makes me think that when I think of white people who are maybe like indifferent or have apathy, that so much of that, right, is they're connected to other people, right? So like, to me, it's how do white people call other white people in, right? So it's like, if you have family members who don't see this, who don't believe in it, it's like, how do you over time continue to invite them in to conversation, share books you're reading, things you're watching, bring them somewhere, a play, a restaurant, something that I think there's like the urgency, right? Like we have to fix, 400, 500 years of racism in 1 year, right? Versus like, what if we spent several years, the rest of our lifetime, inviting people in, right? And that could be exhausting for white people, but that could be your form of reparation, right? Is that I'm going to show up over and over and over again for the rest of my life. I'm going to teach my kids and my clients, and like over time, you get more and more people, right? It's just kind of like when there was the Civil War, right? There was a whole part of the United States that said, no, we still want to enslave Black people. But like, we don't need all the white people to get it. We just need enough to not get in the way so that, we can build more equity and we can have more BIPOC people in leadership positions. And then we can start to change some of the policies that enslave people and cause people to die at really young ages, all of that stuff. So like, I think of it as like concentric circles, like the people who are like actively challenging racism, like the idea that racism exists. I just wish you well, right? Like there's really, I'm not even like gonna use energy to try to chat with you about stuff. Like, but there are other people who are just uninformed, uneducated, have lived segregated lives, and with some nurturing could be really great allies. And I'm going to put more of my energy there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for being a good ally to us and in our work, because I do see it as like it's not, racism is not a Black person's problem to fix, and I see the leaders in this movement are mostly Black women, and I'm really grateful for it and for the ability to have the capacity for you to be here, and to do what you do every day. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Carrie. That was beautifully put. Ladies, we can't thank you enough, but we have successfully, tech problems aside, pulled off our 50th episode, believe it or not. So at the end, thank you. And with a beautiful, powerful conversation with beautiful women. I'm so excited. But at the end of every episode, we have the last hurrah, and Ednesha's up. She's got some questions for you guys that might not make you that uncomfortable. So we're going to see.
It's just one question.
They could be very, very personal. We never know. Go on.
So it's been so much talk about quarantine purchases. What is your favorite item that you bought this year? and we'll go around. What's the favorite item that you guys bought this year during the pandemic? While we've been trying to make ourselves more comfortable at home.
I bought the Dyson blow dryer.
Uh-huh.
Oh, you did?
I did.
That's a decadent purchase, my friend. And I have to say, just today, I saw in my hairdryer when I was getting ready for this event, because I had to do the whole thing. I was like, oh, there's a little flicker of a flame. I'm going to have to get a blow dryer before this is over. I got Dyson and Dry Bar on my list. Excellent. Okay, go on. Who else? Lyrica, what did you buy?
I got a hammock and installed it on my balcony, and that, even though I can't use it right now, it's winter, but I really miss it, and I think that was probably the best purchase because it's amazing.
Nice.
Also an excellent purchase. And there's a balcony. We're all coming to visit. I mean, all I want is outdoor space. That's
City
it.
people can have hammocks too. Thank you for that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, we got two more. What do we got? Dr. Natalie?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I was like, I don't feel like I had like big purchases. It took me a while. And then I was like, okay, I bought myself a Coach purse and an air fryer.
Ooh.
I would say those are the two things. And I am just loving my air fryer. I mean, it's just, I heard people talking about it, but I was like, what's the big deal? I don't want one more contraption. But this thing, oh my God. Like my husband is like, oh, we're using it again? Oh. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh, this is delightful.
Oh my goodness. More ideas. Yeah, we got a juicer. It was a bad idea. We used it like for a week. It was like, it wasn't even me. Like he was like, I'm going to juice. And he juiced for a week. And the other day I put like a bowl of fruit out. I was like, here, babe. Nope. He like took 2 pieces of fruit and left. I was like, I thought you were going to juice for me like every day until we went back to work. No.
So wait, Dr. Natalie, I have to send you this guy on Instagram. His Instagram is all about him and his air fryer. It's all the things that he makes with the air fryer. It's super cool. I got to send it to you. You'll love it.
I believe it.
Give you some good ideas.
Oh, yeah.
The air fryer.
Yeah.
And one more gadget.
My sister told me about the air fryer. So now that's the university to me. I got to get the air fryer.
Got the air fryer. Okay, but what'd you buy?
Oh God, what didn't we buy? I have my 11-year-old and my 9-year-old putting crap into my Amazon cart all the time. I go to Amazon to buy like filters for the turtle tank, and there's like 30 things in the Amazon. What the hell are you thinking? God, what? Unfortunately, anything that has kept our kids occupied. We bought like a pop-up Intex pool for the summer that Amir and I installed.
I was just gonna say you got a pool, right?
And then we
that
had
was
to
it.
sit down. That was fun. You know, God, I'm talking to anything, honestly, anything for the kids that gives them some sort of joy and activity and gets them away from the screen. Great.
Okay.
I'm into it.
All right. Well, I have to say I'm glad I didn't hear anybody got a quarantine puppy. Did anybody get a quarantine puppy? Because I'm going to tell you that my dog is never going to be left alone. So the anxiety, the attachment disorder that has been created in my dog. I'm surprised.
You know, I was at the farmer's market the other day, and I saw like 10 people struggling with their new dogs. Like if you look around the city, everybody is struggling. There's a dog that won't walk. There's a dog that's like doing crazy stuff. Like people are struggling with their dogs. It's so funny.
Oh, dog trainers are busy
right now.
Busy.
Yep.
The dog trainer that I used to try to get my dog to stop barking at the TV, which didn't work. Anyway, I see her now with a different dog, like every day, like sometimes twice a day. She's like, she is so busy. Well, ladies, again, thank you so much. And Ednesha, 50th episode. We are what?
Wow.
Still living in a pandemic. I know.
Yes.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
You ready to close it out?
Unbelievable. You guys are wonderful.
Thank you. So how do we close this out, Diana? Stay safe.
Stay safe.
Wash your hands. And wear your damn mask.
People. Wear the damn mask so we can go outside. All right. Thank you so much. And
right,
we're going to
thank
stop
you.
here, and everything will be in the show notes, and you guys will hear from us
Thank
again.
you, everyone, for
Thank you.
listening, for being here. Bye-bye.
Bye. Woo. I don't know how.
What do we do?
I'm going to end it. Bye, guys.